Hey everyone, it's Alexi here from Exile. In this video, I'm going to take you through the step-by-step process of how you can finance a film for $1 million. And this video is going to be a bit different to the videos that I usually put out. As you can see, I've got a spreadsheet out in front of me. So we're going to get very tactical in this. I'm going to show you some of the ins and outs of film financing, and hopefully if you do like this video, I want to hear from you in the comments, because that will allow me to put out more content like this that's a bit more tactical than the videos that I usually put out. So let's not delay any further. Let's jump in and get started. This right here is the finance plan template that I use for every film. And it really is the starting point before we even start looking at a budget for a film. As soon as we start thinking that we want to make a film or we want to get involved in a film, this is the document that I pull up so that I can start thinking about how I'm going to finance a film and whether I actually think I can finance it. So let's dive in. We've got the project title, $1 million film. It's not 2019. So let's update this. What are we? 06. For all you Americans out there, we'll make sure the date is how you like it. So $1 million film. What first thing you need to do is basically just put in $1 million up here, right? So that's the total budget of your film. That's what you're trying to achieve. Over to the right, we've got something called production QPE. QPE stands for qualifying production expenditure. And qualifying production expenditure is a very, very, very important term for you to know and understand when it comes to film financing. And what it is qualifying production expenditure is all those expenses that qualify under a tax incentive, and it's basically all the money that you're going to get back, or that the calculation of a tax incentive is calculated on, and it helps you calculate how much money you're going to get back from an incentive, whether it's a tax rebate or a tax credit. So for this finance plan, what I've done is I've assumed down here under tax incentive, you're going to access a 30% tax incentive. Right now, some of you might be fortunate enough to live in a country like Australia where you can get a 40% tax rebate, or you might be looking at shooting in a country where you can get 40%. Others might be in states in the US where you get less, right? You might get 25%. But this is really important to firstly understand that if you're going to finance a film for $1 million and you're an independent producer, a tax incentive is almost a prerequisite, right? Because getting 30% of $1 million is a lot of money. And for you to go out and raise that money privately, on top of what I'm going to show you have to raise, it's just a huge ask. So if you can make that easier by bringing in a tax incentive, you absolutely have to. So I'm going to assume 30% in this, and you can see I've then calculated it by 0.9. I'm going to come back to that and show you what that means. So with a tax incentive, usually your qualifying production expenditure excludes contingency, finance costs, and then depending on the actual tax incentive, there could be other expenses that don't qualify. But what I usually do at this stage when I'm first having a crack at a finance plan, I'll just basically remove contingency, which is around 10%, and remove the finance costs. So what I would do here is simply go, all right, if I'm getting 900K, my finance costs, so I'm calculating the finance cost over here. I'm going to explain this to you in a sec. So I can see it's 24K. So I need to reduce this by 10%, which is 100K, and then about another 25K. So that takes me to about 875,000, which means if I'm getting 30% back from a tax credit or incentive, I'm getting around 236,250. Now, why am I multiplying it by 0.9? Because when you go and borrow money from a film finance company and you're borrowing against a tax incentive, that finance company is only going to lend you 90% of the full 100. The reason that they do that is to just basically create a little buffer between the amount that they're lending you and the total figure that you're meant to get back. Because in the event that you run under budget or you don't spend as much, they don't want to be in a position where you owe them money. So they basically create like this buffer or this margin. So they're lending you 90% of the tax incentive, whether that's 30% or 40%. Now, your finance costs are usually around 10% of what you're borrowing. And that's made up of around 7 to 8% interest and around 2 to 3% of fees, so like establishment fees, they call them. Now, that can vary lender to lender, company to company, but that will give you a rough range. So again, at this stage, I would just put in 10% and know roughly what my finance costs are. So you can see down here that I've now got a gap of $673,750 to make up. Now, on $1 million film, in the position that I'm in, where I've made a number of films, I've managed to sell them to distributors and sales agents, I know now if I take a project to a distributor, to a sales agent, and I have a really high quality script, I have a director attached who has some solid work, whether it's features or short films, and it's a genre film, I know that I can get roughly 30 to 50K from a local distributor and around 100K from a sales agent. Okay? So, now again, these aren't going to be exact. I'm not going to know those until I go and actually pitch to those companies and get real offers. But that's going to give me a starting point and a bit of a range of what I'm going to get from them, and it's going to help me determine how much private investment I need to raise. Which really, this is what this whole exercise is about. It's about finding out how much private equity you need to go out and raise from the market. So now that I've got those in, I've got a gap of around 613. The next thing I'm going to do is, on a film with $1 million budget, I'm going to want to bring in the post-production company as an investor in the project. So typically a post-production budget on a $1 million film, or actually on any budget, is around 20 to 30% of the total budget. So if it's 30%, that's 300K, and I'm going to be looking to get them in for around 40 to 50% as an equity investment. So let's call that 150,000. Okay. Now I'm going to have fees that I'm going to be able to charge as a producer, which are going to sit anywhere between 5 to 10% of the total budget. And I'm going to include overheads in there, which are about 5%. So that gets me 50K from overheads, and let's call it 75K from fees. Right? Now, I might be prepared to invest a percentage of those back into the film to help get it financed. So if I was prepared to invest half of that, that's, what are we at, 125K, so let's call it like 62,500, right? So now I know in order to finance this film, I need to raise 400, let's just call it 400 grand. Right, and I'll just put the difference into this producer line. Now, what I'd be doing on a film like this is, if I'm teaming up with a director who is co-producing the project with me, I would have them contributing in here as well. And of course, I'd also be putting up, if I have cash available that I'm willing to put into the project, I'd be putting that in. Now, this is the great thing about a spreadsheet and about a finance plan. It's absolutely adjustable. So if you don't want to put that money in, that's fine. Take that down to zero, but know that you need to raise another 63,750. So this is basically how you would get to financing $1 million film. You would need to raise roughly $400,000 in private equity. You would need to contribute some of your own money and fees into the project. You would need to get a post company on board who's willing to invest into the project at that level. You need to attach a local distributor and an international sales agent, and you would have to access a tax incentive. So if you're the producer, you have to do all of those things. It's your responsibility to go out and raise each of those elements of the finance plan. Now, what order would you do it in? So there's a couple different ways you could do this. Basically, as soon as you have this finance plan worked out and you know how much private equity you need to raise, my view is at that point you should go out and start trying to raise private equity, because that is by far the thing that takes the longest out of all of this. So the more time you can give yourself to do that, the better. If you have the script ready, your director attached, and I would also have like a lookbook of, ready to send out. Then the next thing you could do is basically get it out to distributors, get it out to sales agents, try and get those deals locked in, and then make sure you're across the requirements for the tax incentives. Make sure you understand any upcoming deadlines, what the eligibility criteria is, right? You need to be across that. So basically these three things you could start tackling. Now you might be asking, well, what if I don't have cast attached, or I'm not able to attach A-listers to the project? So if you've got a really high quality script and it's a genre film and the director has some experience, then you can sell the project based off those elements alone. You don't need to attach a really big name to get that sort of money. Now, here's a little hack. What you can do is go out to those sales agents, right? Get letters of intent or get offers from them, but before you actually sign up with them, if you have those letters and you have the rest of the finance attached, go out to a bigger name. Go to a big name, go to their agent, say you want to attach them to the project. When they ask if it's financed, you can say it's financed. And then if their fee is more than you've budgeted for, at that point, go back to the distributor, go back to the sales agent and say, hey, you wanted this film, with no names, you were willing to put up 100K. If I got this person, how much more would you be willing to put in? So that's a bit of a hack there, and it's a way that you can get around that annoying chicken and egg scenario with trying to cast an actor when you don't have finance, or when an agent keeps asking you if you have finance. So that's basically how you would finance $1 million film. Now, what that looks like in terms of budget. So I would break it down roughly like this. So you've got $1 million, 20% is going to be above the line, 30% is going to go to production, 30% is going to go to post, 10% is going to go to your admin costs. So that's like finance, legals, accounting, overheads. So that's going to make up the bulk of the admin. And then 10% is going to be contingency. So that's a very rough way of doing it. Now you don't have to do your budget like that, right? You can decrease post, you can increase production, you can decrease production, you can increase above the line. It's totally up to you how you do it, but that will give you a rough idea about how much money you have to spend on production. And so it's going to give you an idea also about the type of film that you can make, because $1 million sounds like a lot of money, but actually when you break it down, you see you've only got about 300K for production, and that's not actually that much money, right? When you include all the labor costs, all the equipment hire, it basically, you chew through that money very quickly. So that is basically how you come up with the finance for $1 million. And I would, at this point, if I was looking at a project, the next thing that I'd be doing is basically roughing out the production budget and seeing if I can actually make the film, so I've got the screenplay, see if I can actually make that film for that amount of money. And if I can't, then I need to start tweaking this. And so one principle that's really important to keep in mind when you're financing and budgeting a project is that these things, these documents, and include the screenplay, right? So those three things, you should think of them as live organisms, right? So what do I mean by that? What I mean is, like, as you're going, you're constantly updating these things, you're tweaking them, you're refining them so that they can continue to live together, right? As this one organism, because the minute one of them is out of whack, then the whole project can't work. So And to give you an idea, like sometimes we'll go through multiple finance plans and budgets on a project. We also have, our plan A, our plan B, and our plan C on a project. So we'll have different versions of the finance plan, based on whether we land certain pieces of finance. Like for example, what if we could only raise 100K, right? Then we need to think about, well, can we actually make this film? Like, is there a version of this film that we could make? Sorry, that's 10K. Is there a version of this film that we could make for around 700, right? So I'd be thinking about that as well. And always with private investment, I'm thinking about like, what's that amount that I'm fairly certain that I can raise, or I feel confident that I can find, and I'd always have a base finance plan based on that. And then I'd have like my ideal version, right, where you go out and you raise 400K. So that's how to approach this. Now, what I'm going to do is also just take you through a version of the finance plan where all you know is how much private equity you have or how much money you're willing to contribute, right? So let's say, for example, you have managed to raise 250K, right? People have, they know who you are, they're tracking you as a filmmaker, they're in your network, and somehow you've raised this money. That may sound odd to you, but I've had multiple films that I've produced where filmmakers have come to me and they've already raised a bunch of private equity. So what I would do from here is basically build this finance plan around that 250K. So the first thing that I would do is create a budget, a $250,000 version of this film, whatever the film is. And I would be working with the director to basically update the screenplay or make any kind of creative decisions or compromises that would need to be made in order to get this film to fit within a $250,000 budget. Because if they've already got the 250K, then the first thing is to work out, well, is there a way we can shoot it for that 250K? Because what if we're not able to raise any more money? We want to know that we can actually get this film into production before we start spending too much time on it. So 250K is where I would start, and I'd create a version based on that. But then I'd also say, okay, like what's an ideal version that we can shoot for? So again, if it's let's say I'm not confident that I can get a sales agent or a distributor attached, right? Then the first thing I'd be thinking about is post-production. Can we get like a post-production deal in? Maybe that's 50K. So then let's throw in the tax incentive, right? So that's going to be about, let's call it 260. Now this assumes that you're dealing with a tax incentive where the minimum spend is under 300, right? So you're over that hurdle. But you might be in a state or a territory where, so let's just update this. Let's take it to 400. You might be in a state or territory like in Australia, right, where the minimum spend is 500K. So you could be looking at your 250,000, and even with the tax incentive and even with some post-production investment, you're not able to get over the 500K hurdle. So what would you do here? Well, you have to raise another 100 grand privately, or bring in that finance from somewhere else, right? So this is basically how you do it. You start with your private investment and you build the budget up from there. And that's really my preferred way of doing it. I always prefer coming into a finance plan, starting with a private investment, building the budget out from there, and rather than coming into it and putting in a figure in the total budget and then trying to work out the finance from there. I always think that if you start with what you're able to raise or what you think you can bring into the project in terms of finance, you're setting yourself up with a much better chance of actually getting the film up and into production. Obviously, this is a very independent producing way to do it. you know, if you're working at a studio, they're going to do it way differently. If you're working at a mini major, they're going to do it differently, right? They're probably going to get a line producer to just budget the whole film, and then they're going to come up with a budget and work out a way to finance that, or just write themselves a check to finance that, right? But at this stage of your filmmaking career, and certainly for my filmmaking career, like, this is how I do it, and this is how I've always done it. So that's it for this technical, tactical finance plan video. Now, if you've got any questions about this video, please throw them in the comment section below. I will get back to any questions that you have. It is a bit technical, so if needed, I'll record a follow-up video to this if you have any specific questions or things that you want me to expand on or to explain in more detail. And if you like the video, please throw a like, subscribe to the channel. The more people that I'm able to help with this type of information, the more films are going to go into production, which is a good thing for the entire independent sector. So that's it for the video. See you on the next one.